Today, I'm going to show you how to make a tip calculator. This is almost identical to the one that you'll find on Google if you search up tip calculator. It's not copied at all. I've just got inspired by it and I was like, you know what? I'll make this project. The first thing you're going to need is Node.js. To get Node, you're going to want to go to nodejs.org/en and download this latest stable version. It's the LTS version. Just download that. After you're done with that, go to vite.js.dev. And you're going to want to click this Get Started button, scroll down, find this where it says npm 7 plus extra double dash is needed. And you're basically going to copy this line, go to your text editor and open up your terminal. In this case, I'm using VS Code, and you can just go up to terminal, new terminal, or just click, in my case, control and backtick at the same time. Navigate to the folder that you want to put this app in. So in my case, I'm already there. So I'm just going to paste this command in, delete this view at the end and write React. And then change this my view app, change this to whatever you want to call the app. In my case, I'm going to call it tutorial, press enter. Now cd into that. So in my case, cd tutorial, then run npm install to install all the packages. Now I need to open this up. We are going to kind of reset this app and make it so it's not a bunch of boilerplate. So first thing you want to do is go to app.jsx, delete everything in it. You can keep the fragment, or we're going to change that fragment into a div, and we're going to give it a class name of app. I'm just going to write hello world, delete this use state, delete these 3 lines up here, then go to your index CSS, and we're going to delete most of the stuff here. So delete everything under this root, and then delete this color line where it's color RGBA, more of kind of a white color. Delete the background color here. You can leave everything else. So now I'm going to paste in a bunch of CSS variables, and I won't make you guys type all these in. That'll be the worst. So just go look in my description and you just copy. I've just left a block there, or in the comments. If it's not in the description, look in the comments. Just copy it and just paste it and you should be good. Bunch of CSS variables. These are super handy. If you don't already use them, I'll show you how in this video. So once you have those, we're going to change the background color of the app to just write this var keyword, and then kind of like you're writing a function, just these parentheses. Then you just name the variable. In this case, it's color background primary. And we're going to change the color of the app as well, like the text color. So this is going to be var color text primary. Make sure to close that off with a semicolon. All right, so once you have that, go under this root. We're going to set everything to height 100. Do HTML body and the root ID. This is coming from this HTML file, which is like the root div of your React app where everything kind of hooks onto. So here, just write height 100%. And last thing on this file is, oh, you know what? Let me go ahead and run this so we can actually see what we're doing. All right, so I opened up my terminal. I'm just gonna write npm run dev. This is running at localhost 5173. All right, so there's our hello world. So the reset code is basically just resetting everything to padding 0, margin 0, and box sizing border box. Box sizing border box. And what that does is it basically makes padding not add on to the width or the height. Super handy to have. That's a big pain in the butt to deal with otherwise. Okay, go to app CSS, delete everything. So I'm just gonna type Command A or Control A if you're on Windows, and write uppercase app height 100%. And only other thing here is we've got a main element, which we're gonna give a padding of 100 pixels, and then every other side 15 pixels. Display flex direction column, makes everything go from this to this. Max width 1000 pixels, margin 0 auto. And lastly, height 100%. And that is the last of the CSS for now. Next, go to app.jsx, and we're gonna just change a tiny bit. Only thing we're gonna do is add a main, for now at least, a main element. And now, once I add the main, we should be able to see this stay in the center. I do that on pretty much every app. I just have a main, max width, margin 0 auto, boom, you got it centered. So it's time to make the calculator. So go to your source folder. We're already in that. Make a components folder, and in that make another folder called tip calculator.jsx, and another CSS file for that. So I'm gonna run a command. If you want this, I would download this ES7 plus React snippets in the extension library on VS Code. Super handy. Import your CSS file. First thing we're gonna do is just pull this into the app. So delete this hello world and write tip calculator, should auto import. So go to your tip calculator JSX, and first thing we're gonna do is make some state. Our first state is called bill dollars input, and then set bill dollars input. We're going to set this to a string that just says $0, and you need to make sure to import this from React. I'm just going to copy this, tip percent input, 15% as the default string, number of people input, and these are aptly named. These two are these two inputs right here. Then of course set number of people input. Set that equal to just a string of 1. Nothing else, just a string of 1. Then we have our totals. So const tip dollars, set tip dollars. This is going to be a parsed version after all of our validations and stuff. So use state 0, then bill total, set bill total equals use state also 0. Then we're going to have our validators, not our validators, but what signifies whether or not it's a valid number. These are all going to be almost the same. Is valid bill, set is valid bill, true by default. Copy that a few times, change this to is valid tip. Now last validator we have is valid number of people. So now let's make some somewhat dumb markup. We're going to have some state integrated, but this is going to be, we're going to be returning a form here. This is going to have a class of tip calculator. And for the on submit, pass in a function that just returns null. We'll get back to that. Next, we have our sections. So this is one section up here, and this is another section down here. Our first section is going to be a div with the class name of section. We're going to have a div here with the class name of form group. And yes, there will be some repeated code here, but if you stick around to the end, I will show you how to make this components. So we're going to have way less code, way more easy to read code. First off, in this form group, we have a label, and this is going to have a bill text in it. Next, we're going to have a div, and this div is going to have a class name of counter. And in this div, we're going to have an input with a self-closing tag on change. What's our on change? It's going to be a function that we have not made yet. So it's just write a function that returns null. Next, value. This is going to be bill dollars input. Let's go ahead and save and see what we got. We have this absolutely awesome app on the left here. This is going to be type of text. Our placeholder is going to be enter your bill. Our class name is going to be a string that we create. Is valid bill? Is that true? Render nothing. Is it false? Error. So that is where this line comes from. So if you have an invalid input, red line. So our next form group, let's just copy this and we're going to write tip percent with a space. Right here, we're going to have a button. And for the on click, just a function that returns null. And this is the arrow function, so it returns whatever's on the right side as long as you don't add a block. In this button, we're going to add a minus sign because this is going to subtract. It's also going to go disabled. And this, of course, is type button. Fun fact, if you don't have type button on a button inside a form, it's going to submit the form. And our disabled, that is our disabled state. For now, it's just going to be false. Look at that. We have our button. And now we're just going to copy this, put it under the input, format, boom. Make this a plus. All this is good, but we actually don't need disabled because you don't want to limit someone's tip. If they want to tip 70,000%, just let them. Last one, we have our number of people. So this one's going to be crazy similar to this one. So you can just copy this whole form group right here. Make sure you get the whole thing. And this one's going to be number of people in the label. And just go over here for now. We've only got to change a couple things. Just change your placeholder to number of people splitting the bill is valid number of people and number of people input. Next part is the results. So instead of this side, it's going to be this side that we do now. All right, so go under this section, click the section, look at this line, see where it ends. Boom. So it's this div right here, right next to the form. Make another div with the class name of section. This is going to have two almost identical divs. So div class name of result container and another one just like it. They're twins. So inside this div, inside both of them actually, they're going to be slightly different, but we're going to have a div called header and result. This is going to have two paragraph tags, one being tip colon, and then another being pretty much nothing right now. Just write a dash there for now. By the way, if you're liking this video, click that like button. It really helps out. Write another div called class name of header and result. And this is going to have two paragraph tags as well. one being total, colon, and another paragraph tag, which is for now just a dash. Go under the result container div. And this is the last part of the markup, I promise. We're gonna get to the fun part in a moment. Go under the header and result div, and we're gonna have a paragraph tag. This is actually gonna be on both of them. This is gonna be what says per person. So paragraph tag, class name, per hyphen person, and just write /person. You can just copy this. This is gonna be conditionally rendered by the end. Oh, so just put this under this header and result div on the other one too. Cool, we have all of our markup. It's ugly, it doesn't work, but we have all of our markup here now. So let's go ahead and take care of some of these event handlers, all these on clicks and on change and all whatnot that I just didn't do anything with. So first thing we're gonna do is gonna go to the top and work our way down. We're gonna skip the on submit for now. We're just gonna move on to the on change right here. And this is gonna be a function called handle bill dollars change. We haven't made it yet, but we will right now. So this is gonna be a function called handle bills dollars change. And it's gonna take in an E argument, parameter, whatever it's called. And this function is going to create an input, which is basically just referencing e.target.value. And we are going to replace all of the dollar signs with nothing. So if someone's typed in a dollar sign, we're gonna strip it. We're gonna add it back, don't worry, but while we validate, we're gonna strip it. So replace all dollar signs in case for some reason they wrote more than one. And under this, set is valid bill to a function that we have not made yet, but we will right now. This function is called is valid input. We're gonna pass in this input, and the is valid input just returns a Boolean because set is valid bill expects a Boolean. And we take two arguments. First is the input itself, then the type, in this case dollars. So this function is gonna be called is valid input. Num string is our first parameter. Unit type is our second. So num string is our input. Unit type is this dollars. So open up this function, and our first is going to be if unit type is equal to dollars, and our string matches this regex. Don't worry, this is all relatively simple regex. You don't exactly need to understand it. I'll attempt to explain it. I'm not that great at regex. This is gonna be starting at the beginning of the string. We're looking for a dollar sign. This is escaping this dollar sign here because dollar sign means something in regex, so you want to escape it. Then add a period, which means anything, and we want to add a plus sign, which means as many of anything as we want, so like multiple characters of anything. So if it matches this, we want to set num string equal to num string dot replace dollar sign with a empty string, kind of similar to what we did right here. Then copy this right here, write percent for our tip percent, and then this regex, change this to, oh, I forgot something. So in this percent regex match, delete everything within these forward slashes, and we're gonna write dot plus. So any amount of, or any character at any amount of characters, look for a percent sign. And then this is why we had to escape the dollar sign. The dollar sign signifies the end of a string. Change this percent sign to, or this dollar sign to a percent. Next is checking for integer, which is basically what this number of people is going to be. So if unit type equals integer, then we want to return a Boolean that says, does num string match this regex? So at the beginning of the string, look for a 0 and then any digit, add a G for global. We actually want to make sure that this does not match. So write a bang, that's what it's called, a exclamation mark. And at the beginning of the string, look for any number 1 through 9, not 0, because you can't have 0 people, right? Look for any digit and dollar sign. So that's the end of the string. And this is going to be dot test. We want to make sure that that matches, and this test is looking for what we're actually testing. So num string, promise, this is almost done. If you've made it this far, just keep going. It's almost done. This is the worst part. All right, so double ampersand parse int num string is greater than or equal to 1. And this next return, so integer needs to meet only this criteria right here, but percent and dollars need to meet the following returns criteria. And this basically says if it meets this criteria, which is saying, does it have a percent or does it have a dollar sign? Strip that. Otherwise, keep going and make the following validation. So this is going to be returning whether or not num string, so our input matches. Attempting to explain regex is kind of exhausting. It's probably even more exhausting to listen to. So we're looking for a 0 at the beginning, any digit globally, and we want to make sure that does not match. So if that doesn't match, return true. But it also has to appease these criteria. So num string does not equal quotation marks and is not a number. So we want to make sure that it is a number. Pass in num string to that, and parse int num string. So when you parse num string, it's over or equal to 0, not 1. Okay, so now that that's done, go back to our handle bill dollars change and set bill dollars input to a string that has a template in it, a string template, and just pass an input. And we want to add back. See, we stripped it over here to check it, or over here. Now we're gonna add back our $sign. So I believe our input should work now. Boom, looks like I have the tip connected to the same thing. So let's go down to your tip form group and change the bill dollars input to tip percent input. Next is our tip percent on change. And this is gonna be super simple, or super similar. Basically gonna be the same thing. So just copy the bill dollars change, paste it, call it handle tip percent change, and change this $sign to a percent, change this dollars to a percent, change this set is valid bill to set is valid tip, then change this set bill dollars input to set tip percent input. And we're actually gonna just pass input, no kind of string formatting now. Take this handle tip percent change and pass it into this on change of this next input, just that whole thing. We'll take care of these plus and minus buttons in a moment, but for now we're just taking care of the inputs. We don't have a validation, but we have an input that works. Next is our handle number of people change. We're gonna pass this into this on change function on the number of people form group. So it's just put handle number of people change. Actually, just copy one of these whole functions, paste it, change the name to handle number of people change. And this is gonna be dang near identical to the percent one. All we need to do is take out this replace all and change this percent to an integer. Change this is valid, set is valid tip to set is valid number of people. Set this set tip percent input to set number of people input. So now this input should work. Cool, our inputs work. Now let's take care of these increment and decrement functions. So our first one is going to be the decrement for tip percent. So in this minus button, go to this on change, replace this with handle tip percent decrement. Take that name, go under your functions and create a new function called what we just made, handle tip percent decrement, no parameters. So first we want to make sure that we can't go under 0 because you can't have a negative percent. So if we actually have a little bit of regex here, super simple regex. At the beginning of the string, look for a 0 or look for a 0%. And if either of these match, we want to do the test method that regex gives us, tip percent input. So we want to test tip percent input to match this pattern. If it does, return. We don't want to do anything. If it's at 0, we don't want to go lower than 0. So now we kind of want to do a funky thing where we create a new string, but in that string we parse a number and do some math. So write a variable called new input, set it equal to a string template or a template literal, whatever they're called. Right here, we're going to write parse float because tips can be percents. Pass in tip percent input. And if tip percent input for some reason is null or an empty string, we just want to parse a string 0. And with that parsed number, we want to subtract 1. And at the end, add a percent symbol. So we yet again want to validate that this is right just in case. So set is valid tip to the return value of is valid input. And remember, pass in our input here. Actually, it's new input and percent as our type. And we don't want to block anything from working because we still want to be able to see our new input but also see that it's wrong, which we'll get to that. But that is why we're going to also right after set our tip percent input to our new input. So now I think this should work. I did make one small mistake. Just go to this 0% in the regex and add a up arrow. All right, after rigorous testing, I have found the problem. So go to where I've called this, and it's actually not on change. I'm in the minus button for the tip percent. It's not on change, it's on click. And I've probably made this mistake elsewhere. So on change, turn that to on click on any of the buttons. Yep, did it there too. So on change to on click, on change to on click. I think it works. Yeah, it works. And see, it adds on the percent. Now we're gonna add the increment button because that does not work. This is a super similar function. Just copy this, paste it. Make sure you pass in handle tip increment to the plus button right here, the on click, and make sure you don't do what I did and actually add one instead of subtracting one. Now it actually adds. So let's go ahead and take care of this number of people. Oh, and also you can get rid of this line right here in the increment button because you don't need to check for 0 at that point. So now your first line should be new input, parse float, and all that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take care of the number of people input, the incrementing and decrementing of those. So you can pretty much copy this last function, and we're just gonna modify it a little bit. Handle number of people decrement. So in this function, we're going to change this to number of people input and change this parse float to a parse int because you can't have half a person. So yeah, change your parse float to a parse int and take away this percent symbol, change this percent to an integer, change set is valid tip to set is valid number of people, set tip percent input, change that to set number of people input. Then we want to take this name, set handle number of people decrement, and move that to our minus button on the number of people field. So change this function here that returns nothing. And now we're going to copy this again. So just change this to handle number of people increment instead of decrement. I've made a mistake here. Just change this plus to a minus in the decrement function. And then take this function here, take the name, and we're going to pass it down into the on click for the number of people increment on click. So now, hypothetically speaking, we have a number of people that's gone way up. This is a big old table of people that are splitting this bill, but that's also a big old bill. So let's go ahead and add the calculate tip functionality. So I'm actually going to use the use callback hook for this. And full disclosure, I'm still kind of trying to understand this hook, but to the best of my knowledge, I'm pretty sure use callback hook, whatever function you pass into it is memoized and does not get recreated on each render. If you know more about that, please let me know in the comments, because this is something I'm trying. It's like a blank spot for me is how use callback works. The only thing I looked up was why a certain thing was happening, and the solution was to use callback. Anyways, go to the top of the file, and I've got it right under the state. So I'm gonna make a function called calculate tip, and this is gonna be set equal to use callback, and make sure to import this from React. Should look like this. So import use state and use callback. And this takes two arguments, one being the function, the callback function. In this case, we have an E parameter because we're gonna use this for our form submitting. So I'm gonna make an arrow function, open it up. For now, do nothing, but actually I will write E question mark prevent default. And the question mark, there won't always be an event because the decrement and increment needs to also calculate, but this is the only place we're using the event. So that's why I've got that there. This would throw an error otherwise. So the dependency array is going to be a lot like use effect. We are going to pass in almost all of our state, number of people input, tip percent input, bill dollars input, is valid tip, is valid number of people, and is valid bill. And in this function, we are going to go under the prevent default, and we're going to check for any invalidness in this form, because if there is anything invalid, we don't want to do any calculations. We're going to make sure that is valid bill is true and is valid number of people is true. Make sure to add the exclamation marks. Oh, not an and sign, an or sign. If any of them are invalid, we want to return, get the heck out of this function. So or is valid tip is false. If any of those are false, return, get out of that function. Next, we're going to parse all the numbers. So const parse bill equals parse float bill dollars input. We want to give parse float the input, but also replace anything that could be left in the input, such as a $. Really only just the $. Change that to parsed bill. Copy that. Change this to parsed tip. Change this to tip percent input. Change the $sign to percent. And lastly, we just want to copy that again, change this to parsed number of people, parse int, because you can't have half a person, and pass in, you can just delete this, pass in number of people input. And this is where the event comes into play. So if there is an event, we want to, if we've actually submitted the form, that's the only time this fires, when there actually is an event. We're gonna set tip percent input to tip percent input, but replace, this is basically saying that when you press enter, there's always gonna be the respective symbols where they need to be. So replace a percent sign. I know this might seem redundant, but I promise there's a purpose to it. And then add a percent sign after that. And under that, we are going to copy it, change this to set bill dollars input, change this to bill dollars input, change this percent to a dollar sign, take away this plus percent and instead write dollar sign plus. So we add on dollar sign to the beginning. And lastly, we're going to go under that, make sure you're outside of this if statement and set tip dollars to a little bit of math. Very easy math, don't worry. First thing is write an extra parentheses here, but we're gonna write parsed bill times another parentheses, parsed tip divided by 100. I misspelled parsed bill. And then outside of these parentheses, we're gonna divide it by the number of people. So under that, write set bill total. And in here, this is gonna be pretty similar. We're gonna have another set of parentheses and write parsed bill plus parsed bill times. And then in these parentheses, write some parentheses here after the asterisk, write parsed tip divided by 100. And after the second parentheses here, write divided by parsed number of people. And we're not using calculate tip yet. So let's go down and make a use effect. First is gonna be a callback function. And in here, we just want to call that function, calculate tip. And notice that there's no event. And then the dependency array with calculate tip in it. So we have not imported use effects, so let's do that. So we just want to pass in calculate tip to our onSubmit. And this is going to be where we have our event object actually true, because it's actually an event. This is sending calculate tip that E object. Let's see if this actually works. 20, actually we won't really notice anything as of yet, but if I don't get any errors, then it works. So it works. I don't have any errors. Let's move on. So let's actually show what we have. We still don't have any kind of result here. We don't know what we're getting. Let's actually add that. So before we do that, we actually just want to make one small variable, and I'm going to call it everything is valid. And this is basically just going to check that all valid states are true. So is valid bill, and is valid number of people, and is valid tip. So now that we have everything is valid, scroll down to your second section area over here. And this is where we're going to actually display our tip in dollars. So delete this minus sign here, write curly brackets, copy down everything is valid. And this is going to be a ternary. This is going to say if everything is valid is true, then we're going to say tip dollars dot to locale string. And this is basically going to turn our decimal into a dollar, so 2 decimals with commas and everything. So in my case, English US. I know a lot of my viewers are from India. What's up, you guys? The second argument is going to be an object which has 2 properties, style currency, and currency is a string called USD. So that is if everything is valid. So let's say everything is not valid. Go to the end of this, right before the curly brackets, write a colon, and then write a dash. We have a tip here. So we have $3 showing up because we have a $20 bill and a 15% tip. So 20% gives us $4. That works. Let's move on. So our total is pretty similar. So we can actually just copy this. Everything is valid up to the hyphen. Go down to the total area. Replace this hyphen with what you just copied. All you need to do is change tip dollars to bill total. And now we have our bill, which is $20, plus our 20% tip, which is $24. Let's add a person. So now we have our bill being split up. So now let's add the logic that actually makes this per person hide and show, because right now we have only one person, but we have this per person string showing up. So these are actually going to be identical, right? Is valid input, and this is a function. So we're going to pass in number of people input, and we're going to say if that's true, and parse int number of people input. So if that's actually a number, if that's over 1, then we're gonna render this paragraph tag. So just highlight that, move it over there. Now that one hid, but when we go to 2 people, it shows up. Very cool, very cool. So just copy that, and you can delete this first one over here. I was on the second one, this is the first one. Just paste the same thing. So now they should be reflecting each other. Cool. So when you have two or more people, per person shows up. Now let's add the disabled states to the buttons. We don't currently have that. So go to your tip %, and in this minus button, take away this disabled equals false, or just the false part. In these curly braces, we want to write parse int, check that tip % input is less than or equal to 0. And remember, this is where we're saying it's disabled, so we need it to be wrong. Tip % input is less than or equal to 0, or tiny bit of regex here. We want to see if it does not match, if the beginning of the string is not a digit, because the beginning of the string would always have to be a digit. Just write a up arrow /D, which just means digit. Dot test tip % input, and I actually forgot our exclamation mark. So now if I write an A here in front of our 20, it goes disabled. If I write a dot, it goes disabled. So maybe in a perfect scenario that should work, the decimal in the beginning, but next is our number of people input. So go down to your number of people, go to the disabled there. Oh, you know what? This is actually going to be almost identical. So you can just copy the last disabled attribute, and put it here in the number of people minus button attribute. I'm just going to change a tiny bit of stuff. Change this tip % input to number, change both of them actually, to number of people input. And instead of checking that it's less than or equal to 0, we're going to check that it's less than or equal to 1. So now you can't go less than 1. All right, let's make this look a little less hideous and actually work 100%. So go to your tip calculator CSS. So first we have our tip calculator class, which is the outermost div of this component. And here we have background color of var, so one of our CSS variables, color bg secondary. So next we have our box shadow. Set this to a variable of -- container shadow. Looking better already. Width 100%. Display flex direction column. I'm not going to go over all of these things. If you have any questions about anything, let me know in the comments. I'll either answer it there or in a video. So that's done. Go to next line, tip calculator, and we're going to drill in and write section. So this is going to be this part and this part. Height 100%. Display flex direction column. Justify content space evenly. Gap 20 pixels. Padding 25, 15. So 25 pixels and 15 pixels, 25 top and bottom, 15 pixels left and right. Gap is the gap between the flex children. Width 100%. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. It'll look way smaller on your screen, but on mine I'm way zoomed in, so on YouTube you can see it. Next, tip calculator section, and we're gonna check that it's not the first child. Now this stuff is super handy. I'm not gonna get into it, but this stuff is super handy if you're writing CSS. I use not, first child, last child, nth child all the time. This is basically saying if it's not the first section, so this right here will apply to this section because it's not the first one. And this one needs a border left, 1 pixel, solid, and our variable color border. So we have our border showing up there. Overflow. Oh, I made a mistake. You don't need this flex direction column. Okay, so now it looks right. So you just need display flex and border radius 5 on this tip calculator. On this not first child one, write overflow x scroll. Under that, we're gonna write the form group, tip calculator, form group. That is each one of these groups right here of the input and the label. This is just gonna be a display flex container, flex direction column. So instead of next to each other like flex defaults to, it's gonna be like that. Gap of 3 pixels. So if you look, there's going to be a little bit of a shift here. Boom, that's from the 3 pixel gap. Next is the label. So tip calculator, form group, label. The label's inside the form group that's inside the tip calculator. So right there, scroll down. Font weight, we're going to make it nice and thick, 600. Boom. Color, we're going to set that to color text secondary, which is kind of like a lighter, color text secondary, not color background secondary. Next is the input itself. So we're going to write tip calculator, form group, input. set a border of 1 pixel, solid var color border. Set the color to color text primary. Next is the font size. So set that to 1 rem. By default, it's a little smaller than 1 rem. Padding, 3 pixels. Border radius, 3 pixels. Background color, transparent. Very nice, very nice, very nice. Width, 100%. Now we're gonna change the placeholder. So tip calculator, form group, input. And this is gonna be the pseudo element of placeholder. We're gonna write color, the variable color text secondary. I'm not sure if that actually changed, but either way, it looks fine. We move on. This is where we're actually gonna have the error. So if input has an error class, and also we want the same thing, but with focus visible, we wanna change this border color to var color error. And by the way, if you missed it in the beginning, I have these CSS variables in the description or in a comment that's pinned in one of those places. So if you don't have these, what I'm typing now, just make sure to go copy those and put them in your index CSS in the root or in the body, either one. Also change your outline color to the same thing. If I was to write a 0 here, we have our 0. But also, if you notice, we have like a black outline around that. We want to get rid of that by writing outline style is solid. Next is our counter, tip calculator, form group, counter class. Just going to be display flex, gap of 3 pixels, and width 100%. Cool, so we have all of our stuff in a line now. Next is these buttons. They're quite small, if you ask me. I am tired of writing this set of things, so I'm just going to copy it and write button at the end. And here we want to add background color, set that to color button background, set the color to var, color text primary, font size to 1.3 rem, set the min width to 30 pixels, width of 30 pixels, border radius to 3 pixels, border itself, so this outline here, we don't want that, quite ugly, just write 0. And lastly, we want a transition. So transition opacity, we want to target the opacity rule and write 0.1 seconds. That's the duration. And the Bezier curve is a ease. Copy this. And we want to add a disabled state at the end, because when it's disabled, we want to make this opacity less than 1. So write opacity 0.25 and cursor is not allowed. The circle with the slash in it. Now we move on to the result container. This is going to be display flex, flex direction column, and position relative. Position relative because these per person things are going to be absolutely positioned because we don't want them to move anything. We want them outside of the box model. Under this, we're going to add header and result. Pretty similar. Display flex, justify content space between. Oh, I made a mistake. This should be relative, not absolute. I don't know why I did that. So now we have them nicely spaced between each other or around each other. Add gap 30 pixels to header and result. So now we won't notice it, but now if you make this way small, then they won't the number won't push into the word. We'll add a media query, don't worry. So next you can just copy this whole thing and write P at the end. And here we just want to make font size 1.75 rem, so quite large, and font weight of 600, quite big, but we're also zoomed in. So normally it would look much more reasonable. Last thing before the media queries is tip calculator, the per person paragraph tag. So P with per person. We're gonna set the color to var color text secondary. So now see it's a different color than all this. Looks very nice. Make sure to put a semicolon there. Position, absolute. So now it's all overlapping and stuff, but we want to position it by saying bottom is 1.1 rem, negative 1.1 rem, not positive. Cool, so now we add a media query, which makes this actually responsive, which is absolutely essential for anything now. So write at media screen and parentheses, max width. We're gonna set this to 500 pixels. So when this hits 500 pixels, which is probably right about there or so, this media query will trigger and anything inside it will come into effect. So we only have a few things here. Tip calculator, flex direction column, tip calculator, section, not first child. We wanna set this to border top, 1 pixel solid var color border. So now I think we should see this come into effect a little bit. So cool. When we make the screen smaller, it stacks on top of each other, and this border that's on the left here moves to the top. Scroll up a little bit, set the label a little bit smaller, tip calculator, label, font size, 0.75 rem. Now these labels right here should be a little smaller when you shrink it up. We're gonna do the same thing with these paragraph tags. Tip calculator, result container, header and result, P, font size 1.15 rem, and font weight of 600. Cool, looks way better. All right, so now let's actually make a navbar and footer. We're gonna make a new folder in your components folder called navbar. And in that folder, make a JSX and CSS file. So navbar.css and navbar.jsx. And this is a super simple component. All you want to do is import your CSS. And we are just going to make a component that returns a nav element. And the only thing in here is going to be a div with a class name of nav container, a paragraph tag inside that, which is tip calculator. Make sure to export this. And in the CSS, we're just going to write nav background color. Actually, let's import this first. So go to your app.jsx, go outside of this main element here and write navbar. So now we have our navbar there. In our CSS, we want to set the background color to a variable. And hopefully you can see now why variables are kind of awesome, because you can just change it in one place and it's changed all over the app. So if you want to change, if you don't like the color scheme I have here, it'll be super easy for you to change. So the color background secondary, that makes it white. Box shadow, set this to the heavier one. Var container shadow heavy, width 100%, position fixed to make it stay at the top of the screen, and top 0. Now we want to target the nav container, so nav element, then nav container. Set this max width to 1000 pixels. This matches the max width of this, so they always kind of stay in alignment. Margin 0 auto, same thing. They also stay in alignment because of that. Padding 10 pixels. And lastly, we have a nav paragraph tag that we want to set the font weight to 600 and font size to 1.1 rem. Very cool. So it looks a little big there, but now normally it would look much more reasonable like that. Okay, so next is the footer, which looks like this. I really like this footer because they can just scroll down, look at my name, and then look at the GitHub link. So just go to your components and make a new folder called footer, and a file called footer.jsx, and another one called footer.css. Make your component, and at the top of your component, make sure to import your CSS. So footer in the same file, footer, and at the top of your file, make sure to import your CSS. So import /footer.css. And this too is going to be very simple. We just have, instead of this div that I have, delete that, make a footer. And in that footer, I've got a div with a class name of container. And in here, I've got two paragraph tags, one being class name of created by, and this is going to be created by Jacob Broughton, and another class or another paragraph tag with your GitHub link. So class name GitHub, and I'm just going to write feel free to visit my GitHub, or my anchor tag GitHub, a link to mine. Cool. So in my CSS, I'm just going to have a footer with padding of 10 pixels, 30 pixels on every other side. Next, we're going to have a container. So footer, class name container, max width 1000 pixels, margin 0 auto, display flex, justify content center, align items center, flex direction, column, to make everything on top of each other. Right now, this is actually not even in our app. So let's go ahead and import that into our app. So under your main, you want to write footer, make sure to import it. Cool, so at the bottom, you should see your footer. The colors might be a little off because we haven't added that part to the CSS. All right, so go back to your footer CSS and we're gonna finish this. So write footer, container class, P, set the margin to 0, font size to 0.9 rem, color to var, color text primary. Then we're gonna have the created by, it's gonna have a font weight of 600, not 600 pixels, and a margin bottom of 10 pixels. All right, last thing on the footer is going to be the GitHub link. So we've got our footer, container, GitHub, and then an anchor tag. And we're gonna set this to a variable called var color link. So we've got that nice blue now, font weight 500. So slightly thicker than these. And I'm gonna delete all of these files because that is confusing to look at. So as I promised in the beginning, I'm going to show you how to make this tip calculator a little bit more dry or do not repeat yourself. Instead of all of these form groups, I'm gonna actually break these into components. This is going to be very quick. Just go to your components folder, add a new component called calculator field, and then your files, so calculator field.jsx and CSS. All right, so in here, make your component. We're going to add a few props, which make this work. We're gonna destructure them, so write your curly braces here. First prop is gonna be label. Set that to a string by default. Then counter options. I'll explain these as we go. This is gonna be an object that takes in a few properties. First is gonna be isCounter. Set that to false by default. Decrement handler. This is gonna be a function that returns nothing by default. And same thing for the next one, increment handler. Then our disabled states. So decrement disabled is false by default. And then the same thing for our increment disabled. Next under this, we have our input value, our onChange handler for the input, our isValid flag. So isValid value is what I'm gonna call it. And then our placeholder. All right, so now let's go ahead and plug these in. I'm gonna go to tip calculator JSX, and I'm just gonna take this form group here and just copy the whole thing. So I'm going to replace this field string here with what I just copied, and I'm just gonna plug these things in. So in the label, I'm going to replace this number of people with label. And then this is where the counter options comes in. So I'm gonna say if counter options.isCounter is true, then render this button. So wrap that in a curly braces and write counter options.isCounter. If that's true, render this. And you can copy this and write it over here as well, and then wrap the end of the button as well. Format it. You can change this handle increment button that was here from the copy and paste to counter options.increment handler. And then change this class name as isValid to isValid value. And then the value equals number of people input or whatever one you copied to input value. And then the onChange to onChange handler. And then take away everything in this disabled attribute and just put counter options.decrement disabled. And you can change this onClick to counter options.decrement handler. And lastly, just move this increment handler or increment disabled to a disabled flag in our button. Disabled equals counter options dot increment disabled. Format it, looks all nice and good. And move our placeholder to where this says placeholder is number of people splitting the bill. Wrap that in curly braces and just pass in placeholder there. And this is all complaining to me because I don't have any prop validation going on. So let me go ahead and show you how to do that. That's very easy. Under your component, write calculator field, which is the name of the component, dot prop types, camel cased, equals object. So the first key is label is equal to prop types. And this we actually don't have yet. We need to import it from a package that we already have installed. Vite did it for us. So just write import prop types, capital on both sides, from prop -types. So now prop types dot string. So now label has to be a string or is expected to be a string. Counter options is in the shape. Basically, it's expecting an object that has these keys in it. So prop types dot shape, and that's expecting an object. And this object has isCounter. This is prop types dot boolean or bool. Decrement handler is a function. Same thing with increment handler. Next is our disabled flags, which are decrement disabled. That is a boolean. And increment disabled, which is also a boolean. And outside of the counter options, you want to write input value is equal to prop types dot string. onChange handler is a function. isValid value is a boolean. Placeholder is a string. Okay, so now let's actually use this. That took forever. All right, so we're gonna go to the first form group here. We're going to write a couple spaces and start typing calculator field. Should auto import when you find it. If it doesn't, this is what the import looks like. But this is a self-closing tag, and press enter a couple times. This is just expecting a few props. This is going to be way easier on the eyes, especially the latter ones with the counters. So label is bill. Counter options is basically non-existent because this one doesn't have a counter. This is the bill field. So is counter is false, and we don't have to do anything else because they've all got default values. Next is input value, and this is going to be bill dollars input. Next is the on change handler. This is going to be handle bill dollars change. Next is our is valid flag. So is valid value equals is valid bill. And lastly, we have our placeholder, which is in this case a string that says enter your bill. And that is going to work the exact same way. We can get rid of that and do the same thing over here. We can just copy this calculator field, paste it. Now let's start moving over the tip stuff. So change bill to tip percent. Is counter is now true. Decrement handler is handle tip percent decrement, and increment handler is going to be similar. Increment handler is going to be set to handle tip percent increment. I think I'm losing my voice, guys. I've been recording this for quite a while, so if you're still around, I appreciate it. So lastly, here is our decrement disabled. This is going to be set to whatever we passed into here. So you can just copy what you passed into disabled flag here and write it there. Next is change the bill dollars input to tip percent input. On change handler, change that to handle tip percent change. Is valid bill, change that to is valid percent, or is valid tip, I'm sorry. And then the placeholder, I typed that wrong from the beginning, but this placeholder will be called percent of your bill. So percent of your bill. And that is our tip percent. So that is almost the last one. So one more. Stay with me, guys. Stay with me, guys. I know you got it. So number of people. This is going to be extremely similar to this one. So we can just copy that, format it, change tip percent to number of people, change handle tip percent decrement to handle number of people decrement. With this one, just copy that and paste to here, change this to increment, go to your disabled attribute in here, copy what's in there, put it in decrement disabled. Our input value is number of people input, so just change this tip percent input up here to that. Our on change handler is, or handle number of people change. Is valid value is valid number of people, so change is valid tip to that. Oh, I made a mistake. So go up to the tip one, and instead of set is valid tip, is valid tip, not the set. And the last thing is we're going to put the placeholder here, which is number of people splitting the bill. And now you can just delete this form group here. Actually, let's make sure it works. Sweet. So yeah, delete this form group here. And now when you have any errors, these dash out and we get a red line. And guys, I think that works. If you guys are still here, I appreciate your time more than you could possibly know. I know this is probably quite a long video, and hopefully you learned something. All I ask is just click the like button. It really helps out a lot. And if you want to stick around, a subscribe would be absolutely awesome. But other than that, I appreciate you watching so much. I will see you in the next video. Peace.